Welcome, Swagatham, Vanakkam. In a recent video dealing with the negative reactions of American Christians to the presence of Hindus or American Hindus in their midst, I advocated that Christians must practice the value or the ideal that Jesus taught, namely that we should love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Predictably, I received a few Christian responses that seemed alarmed by what I was advocating, suggesting as though I'm not particularly loyal to the Christian tradition. I have no specific complaint against being misunderstood or understood in that fashion. But in the light of those reactions, it became very clear to me that I have a duty to offer the reason why I said what I said in that video. And I have to say at the outset that if you want to understand the reason of anything, you have to be patient with it. So let's get started. Jesus in this teaching was addressing a common pattern in all religions. The greatest problem, and the problem common to all religions, is the gulf or the chasm between belief and behavior, between what is professed and what is practiced. For example, all religions preach God. Buddhism may be cited as an example, but Buddha is given, the Lord Buddha is given the status of a God. And God is assumed to be the embodiment of love, compassion, truth, justice, etc. But in actual practice, all those values will be violated in order to secure the advantage of the religion concerned. So you may preach love, but you will actually practice hate. You will preach truth, but actually resort to falsehood when it seems necessary to promote the interest of your religion or religious community. Now let's take a familiar contemporary example. The Bishop of Pala, Joseph Kalarangat, did everything possible to promote enmity between Christians and Muslims in Kerala. And he did so because he was, I believe, forced to do so by the Sangh Parivar, whose political strategy mandates that enmity be created between Muslims and Christians. Then the RSS can present itself as the savior of Christians and thereby cultivate political loyalties, which would then benefit the BJP. My response to this very misguided, ill-advised strategy of the bishop was, and I said that in an interview, I said, what is the religion that Bishop Joseph Kalarangat subscribes to? Because I'm very clear that he cannot be a follower of Jesus Christ and do what he has been doing. Even at that time, I was very clear that Joseph Kalarangat was behaving like a typical religious head who will contradict in practice what he preaches from the pulpit. So I can cite many other examples, but then time will get out of hand. But this is sufficient for us to understand this problem, which is common to all religions. At this point, let me give you a reference, just to convince you that I am not dishing out some personal prejudice, because this propaganda is now quite widespread, that I am simply vomiting my personal frustration and animosity towards some people or the other. God knows the truth. If you have time, please read Friedrich Hegel's Positivity of Christian Religion, Positivity of Christian. It's only about 200 pages, but it's well worth reading. In that very well reasoned essay, Hegel points out this very specific instance. The instance he gives is this. He says you can very well imagine a bishop preaching equality in the Christian community. He will get into the pulpit, he will become very eloquent, and he'll move the audience. And all those listen to him, particularly the rich people in the congregation, they'll be nodding in agreement with the bishop that the poor in their midst must be treated as equals and no vestige of discrimination should be ever entertained in their midst. Then Hegel says, after the sermon is over and as after the service is over, if a poor man from the congregation, encouraged by what the bishop said from the pulpit in the course of the sermon he administered so virtuously, if a poor man gets encouraged by what the bishop said and went to shake the bishop by the hand, he will see nothing but contempt on the face of the bishop and indignation on the faces of the rich people who would thoroughly disapprove the impertinence of the poor man in wanting to shake the hand of the bishop. And that is exactly what Friedrich Hegel writes in the small book or a long essay, whichever you want to put it, Positivity of Christian Religion. Anyone can read it, so you know that I'm not making up things. This is a problem, it's a very serious problem. Unfortunately, Christians in Kerala and Indian Christians in generally are not used to understanding the critical issues pertaining to their own faith. And therefore, when I make references to the teachings of Jesus Christ, they think that I am inventing something on my own. Anyway, so this problem must be understood. And what Jesus was doing was to plead for greater honesty in religion. Honesty in religion means that what you preach, you practice. If you preach love, you practice love. If you preach honesty, be honest. If you preach justice, practice justice. That's all that Jesus is saying. But then there is a very specific relevance to this teaching, and that is with reference to Judaic religion, completely dominated by the priestly class, because after all, Jesus was teaching in the context of Judaism and not in the context of any other religion. So, the Jews had exalted enmity to all others as a religious virtue. Now, let me give you an illustration from the Gospel. In the 4th chapter of John's Gospel, when Jesus meets with the woman of Samaria, he asks her for a drink, and she says, "How can you, a Jew, ask of me, a Samaritan, for a drink?" She's saying, "I have no problem. But you, by your religion, are obliged to hate us. We don't hate you. I have no problem in giving you a glass of water or a pitcher of water. But you are actually going against your religion." How did this religion become a repository of this kind of hostility? Obstinate, ill informed, soulless hostility to all others, not just the Samaritans, but to all other people in that region. And Jews, even today, cannot relate to any other religious community or any other racial group. This is the curse that the Jews are suffering from. And you cannot, for example, understand the complicated nature of the Gaza issue without understanding this problem. This problem is inherent in Judaism, and from Judaism it spread into Christianity, and from Judaism and Christianity it spread into Islam. Muslims the world over do not understand that they are infected by the spirit of Judaism and Christianity. So there is a lot of truth in what the Sangh Parivar has been saying. It's high time that we understood it. what they call the intolerance of the Abrahamic faith. It's a reality. But Christians are intolerant to each other. Denominationally split Christians are intolerant of each other. Where is tolerance in the Christian community? And to the extent that now Hindu community is also being infected by the spirit of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Hindus are also becoming highly intolerant. You would recall that in the last century, about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it used to be commonly discussed among the activists of Hinduism that Hinduism will have a future only if it Semiticized itself. That is to say, only if Hinduism is recast in the mold and spirit of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And unfortunately, that has happened. So, this confrontation that is now taking place in India is actually between the two versions of the same spirit. And if Christians are to cultivate any sense of realism, please understand that what is confronting them in the form of this intolerance towards their presence in India, their religious practices, their religious identity, it's nothing but the spirit that they practice boomeranging upon. I'm sure Christians will be very upset. I'm a Christian, but I have to tell you the truth. Only truth will help you. We have infected the Indian society with this negativity. We have a we may not be the sole factor in this, but we have played a major role in this. Our attitude to other religions, other faiths, must be discussed, understood in truth. So this enmity is universal. Wherever there is religion, there is enmity. And the significant thing is, Jesus was aware that this was a problem, and the problem which created enormous difficulties for the Jews throughout their history. And therefore, Jesus did not want the same curse to continue with the people he called out to be a different a spiritual community. But unfortunately, the teachings of Jesus Christ were completely discarded. And in a few centuries, the spirit of Judaism conquered Christianity, and Christianity became a replica of Judaism. This is exactly what happened in history. And I say this with a lot of responsibility. So, the teaching of Jesus Christ that we should love our enemies was done in a very specific context because Jesus understood the real problem in Judaism, why the Jews could never exist in amity or in normal relationship with anybody else. There is a good reason why the Jews were persecuted wherever they went throughout Europe. The only place, incidentally, where the Jews were not persecuted was India, because India was tolerant. So, please understand that Jesus had a very specific historical understanding about the perversion and the aberrations that abound in religions, particularly the tendency in all religions to exalt enmity towards those who are different to their own community, their own ideas, doctrines, practices, rituals, as a religious duty, as a divine obligation. And this is the most diabolic, this is the most satanic aspect of religion. This is what Jesus understood. That's the only reason why he said you should love your enemies. Okay? Now, the second thing is Jesus understood that the essence of hostility, the essence of enmity is hypocrisy. Please understand this. I myself did not understand it for a very, very long time. It's after decades of analysis, research, reflection, that suddenly that it dawned on me that the source of enmity, the source of religious enmity, I'm not talking about political, cultural, social, economic enmities. All sorts of enmities abound in this world. I'm talking strictly with reference to religious enmity. The real source of religious enmity is hypocrisy. Now, why should and how does hypocrisy breed enmity? This is something we have to clearly understand. Now, let's consider Judaism, because Judaism is the religion that exalted enmity to the greatest heights. So it's a good example to consider. The heart of Judaism is the idea of God. God is love. There's no question about it. It's as simple as that. God is love. And also, because God is love, God is also the liberator. There can be no freedom, there can be no liberation without love. And the classic text for this is the book of Exodus. It shows God as a liberator. Why does God liberate? Because he loves the people. If God doesn't love the people, why should he bother about their condition? So God is love, and it is the nature of love to liberate. So God wants people to live in freedom. But what has happened? Because of the way the religious culture of the Jews was distorted by their priestly class, religion was turned into a new Egypt, a new location of slavery. The priestly class in Judaism enslaved the people. This is exactly what Jesus said. Jesus denounced the priestly class in those days because he said, "You are an enemy to the freedom of the people. You enslave the people, you burden their life." Okay? So they are enslaving the people in the name of God, who is a liberator. You see the contradiction? That's called hypocrisy. This is the heart of hypocrisy. And when you are actually presiding over a system which is hypocritical, you will become extremely violent and you will consider everybody as an enemy who differs even marginally with you. Religious intolerance results in enmity and violence, actually issues from religious hypocrisy. And wherever there is hypocrisy, unfortunately, there is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy has grown and multiplied in Hinduism, which presents itself as a tolerant religion, but also finds it obligatory to practice intolerance. So that's another form of hypocrisy. So wherever there is priesthood, wherever there is a domination of the priestly classes, this hypocrisy is inevitable. It's again something that Jesus has spoken very emphatically about. So I don't have to argue it any further than this. So anything that goes against this religious hypocrisy will provoke intense enmity on the part of the custodians of religion. And the best proof of that enmity and the foremost victim of that enmity is Jesus himself, ironically. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ was masterminded by the priestly class because Jesus came as a liberator. And for the priestly class, there is no greater danger, greater horror than the people being liberated from their clutches. And that's the reason why they could not rest until Jesus was killed. So when Jesus talks about loving your enemy, please understand that there is a context to it. Christians don't understand, neither American Christians nor Indian Christians understand the context in which Jesus taught this and the tremendous sweep and scope of that teaching. So, now, what is the purpose for loving your enemies? It's not a sentimental thing. No, I love my enemies because I am so great. That's not the idea. Or I love my enemies because, I'm very sentimental. That's not the idea at all. It's a very profound thing. What is the purpose of loving your enemy? Hating your enemy is the religious prescription of the old order. That old order has to be transcended for the new to come. You remember, Jesus was always talking about the birth of the new. He said, "Do not put old wine in the new wine in the old wineskin. Do not stitch a new piece of cloth to an old piece of cloth." So Jesus was very conscious that he was the harbinger. He was the initiator of something radically new. And that new vision represents a higher quality of life. That's why he said, "I've come that they may have life in all its abundance." So that higher quality of life must be conjoined with a higher morality. The Jews had their morality, mostly centered on the Mosaic law. But Jesus realized that remaining stuck to that old morality will keep the people frozen in the past. They need to go forward and attain a new and higher quality of life, for which a higher morality needs to be evolved. So, this old idea, a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, will not do in the new vision of life. So, it's not a casual teaching, it's not an extravagant or esoteric teaching. It's a very rational teaching in relation to the new vision of life that Jesus was sponsoring or Jesus was introducing. So, this is what I call the higher morality. That's a characteristic of Jesus' teaching. So, in this new morality, now I'm going to say something very provocative. I'm doing that very deliberately. There is a new enmity. In this new morality, there is a new enmity. That is the enmity to enmity. It sounds a little tautological, but please understand. You have to be an enemy to enmity. You understand? You have to go beyond the enmity. So rather than endorse, if you endorse the enmity, you're a faithful man, you're a faithful Jew. But if you go against that enmity, you become an enemy to that enmity in the eye of the custodians of the status quo. And that is incurring a risk. So I'm incurring that risk today. And I'm doing it very consciously because that's my mission in life. I've come to reinterpret the teachings of Jesus Christ, to make the vision of Jesus Christ as contextually clear as possible, and to educate myself and everybody else regarding the new morality, the higher morality, which far exceeded or exceeds the scope of the morality that we have ever known before. So that's the reason why I take a stand which is different from the conventional pietistic Christian attitude to life. So, in the light of this teaching, we must become aware of a terrible problem in religion. All religions confine us to the outlooks that prevailed hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Our religious zeal is making us antiquated. If you are a pious, faithful Christian, your attitude should go back some 2000 years or at least 1500 years. You're living in the modern world. Everything about you, everything else about you is different, modern, rational, critical, etc. But when it comes to your religious life, you're prehistoric, you're archaic, you're antediluvian, you're crude, you're barbaric. Now, this problem must be realized. Jesus was profoundly revolutionary, prophetic. He was far ahead of the times. He's ahead of our times. That's the most exciting thing for me. Jesus is far ahead of my times, 21st century. But Christians are not large-hearted enough, liberated enough in their mind and their heart to accommodate this Jesus, who is the light of the world. And that light will never fade. It is the exhortation of that light: love your enemies. But in theory, all Christians would accept what I'm saying. But when I bring it down to practice and say that American Christians should learn to love their people who are different, Indian Christians must learn to love the Hindus who are now trying to persecute them in order to prove in a misguided manner their loyalty to Hinduism. Garv se kaho ki hum Hindu hai. Garv se kaho ki hum Hindu. Say or proclaim with pride that we are Hindus. How do you prove that you're Hindus? Not by practicing the spiritual core of Hinduism, not by understanding the philosophical brain of Hinduism. There's only one way to prove you're a zealous Hindu, and that's by attacking poor Christians. That is how, unfortunately, shall I say, corrupted Hinduism has become. How reduced, not corrupted, how reduced, how distorted Hinduism has become in the mouths of such people. But I'm sure that they cannot sully and defame this great faith forever. True Hindus, inspired Hindus who understand the harm that's being inflicted on their faith, which they cherish, will wake up from their sleep and they will join hands with me to make the true spirit of Hinduism prevail, which is the same as making the true spirit of Christianity prevail. which is the same as the true spirit of all other religions, prevail at the level of the enlightened understanding of the spiritual core of religions, there can be absolutely no conflict or enmity between religions. There is a very substantial core of shared spirituality that should unite all people who practice different religions. But unfortunately, this will go against the interest of the people who want to want to fragment humanity into various pockets and enslave them in order to milk them. And unfortunately, this diabolic satanic practice is spearheaded and perpetuated by the priestly class in all religious communities. Now, the politicians have also joined the fray. Therefore, you have communal politics or politicized religiosity, which is the most satanic thing you can imagine. And if Christians in India do not understand it, and accept the correction that the present day demands, they'll have only themselves to blame for it. Jai Hind.